Brett, welcome to Stories in AI. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time and thank you for being here. I have a lot of questions for you, and we were chatting just before. So why don't we just get started? Start by telling us your personal story, right? How did you get into data and analytics, and give us your life story.
I won't tell you the whole life story because it's lengthy, but I will say that I was a kid at school when we had a teacher who just loved computers. And he came to school on a Monday morning and he said he went to a store, and in the store there's a computer and it said, "What's your name?" And he typed Ted and it said, "Hello, Ted." And as he told me that, all I could think of is this is a machine that can learn, can be trained, can remember. And I was just drawn into the concept of learning machines. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of AI. And early systems were, knowledge capture, knowledge management systems, expert systems. The early stuff was really crude, but I was always drawn to it because I've always felt the huge power of data and then the use of systems that are trained on data, not coded, because they can learn on an ongoing basis, get better as data gets better. So I felt that was just this incredible power and potential. So my whole career has tracked it. In almost every job I do, I've been trying to figure out how to get more use out of data, how to make AI practical and useful for people.
Awesome. No, tell us that little, we started talking just before the call, but before we hit record, and you were telling me how you got into IoT,
Yeah.
where you were just trying to automate things for yourself. Tell me that little story there.
You know, one of my earliest jobs, I was being trained by a developer, and she said, "You're a coder now. Don't do anything twice. Copy paste, subroutines. Don't do something twice." And I thought about a lot the things you do every day in your life that I realized were getting tedious. I do the same things. I get up in the morning, turn on the coffee maker, turn on the TV, and I got excited about IoT because I could have systems do these things for me. And so automating the day-to-day tasks, feeding information, I have news feeds and lights that change colors based on the weather. I have just stuff that happens automatically, simply because it makes my life easier. So perhaps it's laziness with tech. And that's what drew me into IoT, was just making it easier to do the things you do every day.
That is awesome. And, you and I have some ways background within Watson too. You spent a long time at IBM. We're responsible for Watson IoT and stuff too. And it's just fascinated me that recently I saw an advertisement, I think on Wall Street Journal, where it said, let Watson do the little things so you can focus on the big things. And I
Yeah.
contrasted it with the original hype machine that, when AI was such a big deal and Watson defeated human beings in jeopardy, it was all
Yeah.
about AI doing the big things, right? And there's a fine realization, I guess, across the market that, it's the mundane, the things that you don't want to do and put your best cognitive powers to use, automate that, use machines to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So,
Well,
um,
I think that people easily get confused that AI is about making artificial people. But it's really very narrow use cases where a machine can do something extremely well. Everyone who processes a check with a mobile app, there's a system that is reading the check for you, determining the signature, the for mobile deposit, the amounts, and all that stuff, and handling it automatically. Of course, people can do that, but why would you do it when a system can do it really well? But I wouldn't ask that same system to watch a movie and write a review. That's interpretive. That's much more open-ended. It's not a finite specific problem of automation using AI. That's a different type of problem. Once you start to feel where it's useful, powerful, and effective, those are the things we don't want to spend time on. They're tedious, repetitive, and machines can do some of those things much better than we can.
but interestingly, talking about value creation with AI, I was also pretty drawn with something you did at Cognizant and your team did, sponsoring the XPRIZE pandemic response contest, I think, the challenge,
Mm-hmm.
and which was honestly not just the little things, but tackling a big problem that was just facing humanity at the time. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that story and what that experience was like, and what were some of the projects that came out of it?
Yeah, what drew us to this was really interesting. The amount of data that was being generated about COVID was huge. Oxford, Johns Hopkins were publishing every single day COVID cases around the world, but they also had people curating the data to look for the strategies people were using, like mask compliance, closing work, closing schools, things like that. They collected all this data every single day. We had a bunch of data scientists, and they looked at all this and they saw the massive potential in that data that had to be unlocked. you could, with that kind of data, predict what will happen every single day in every location around the world based on everything that has happened, and then provide some prescriptive guidance on which of those actions, like closing work, closing school, will have the most effect and be most useful in dealing with the pandemic. So the source of data was actually what triggered it all, because we saw this amazing curated data set that every day was getting updated. And then we figured out we could create a model that would be able to run and retrain every single day. So every day it was retrained automatically to take the latest data, create new predictive models, and then look at all those mitigation strategies like masks and work and school, and then identify which had the most causality based purely on the data, and then recommend actions to take. And the actions were different when we started running it. The actions were different in Oklahoma than they were in England, than they were in India. That was fascinating because it showed how differently different populations responded to different mitigation strategies. It was very powerful. We got excited. We shared it with XPRIZE, and we got other teams around the world using the data and our tools to find better models.
That's awesome. I'm hoping some of the work actually made it to the forefront during our Delta response that has to come into effect very quickly, right? And so in general, right, AI has tremendous potential. I mean, we're seeing value being realized everywhere, a lot of industries, a lot of use case. When you talk about it in use cases, when you talk about specific problems, you can really clearly see that AI can make a lot of difference, right? But value realization with AI is still fairly low in the market in terms of organization. It's just still hard to put this into practice and gain value into a business process and stuff. Why is that? And what do you see?
And
Yes.
I think it does come back to the management, the business leaders of clients around the world do not understand the effect of data and AI. They don't imagine or reimagine their business processes powered by AI. And so they're looking for an answer instead of a new way of working. And so if you look for an answer for a problem, you get an answer. Tomorrow, the answer is different. Like that XPRIZE we talked about before, every day the data changed. Every day the recommendations changed. And if you didn't think of it as a data pipeline, a retraining engine, and an ongoing set of recommendations, if you think of it as a single question, you get a single answer. But if you really look at it as an expert who augments a process, and then you reimagine, how do you deal with setting policy? In the case of COVID, if you could get new insights every day, you'd be making adjustments to your policies every day. That's not how the world was thinking before, but now it is. And I see that in business a lot. People who are algorithmic thinkers, people who are data-driven, they think of process, data, and AI together. How can it be done differently and better? Not just how can I have a smarter answer today?
Interesting. It's like basically a Bayesian way of thinking. You know, when you're
Yeah.
encountering with new data, how do I retrain? How do I position the answer, what I was looking for? But
Yeah.
it's interesting. You mentioned something that's pretty unique, right? One is the fact that it's about a business problem that you're solving. It's not a technical, I have data, what answer should I look for? It's
Yeah.
about, and then you also said it's about reimagining the actual interaction or the process itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So back to my original question around like why are we not scaling? One is people are not doing this enough. But the approach everybody is now taking is building out a centralized, AI center of excellence, and what you get there is more and more data scientists who's going to come in and bring algorithmic thinking, but not necessarily the same, subject matter expertise or leadership oriented thinking to look at the business process. What do you see there? I mean, am I?
No, you're right. It's a huge risk, and I think this is not unlike what happened in the days of e-commerce. People thought just have a bunch of webmasters and you can take your catalog and put it online and you'll be an e-commerce or an e-business. That didn't work that way. Everyone thought it would. It didn't. I'm sure that Jeff Bezos was not the best webmaster at Amazon.com, but he understood the way that people would transact and do commerce online, and he took every process step out that was non-value added, took away friction, made it easier to buy, made it easier to sell, and changed the way that people buy online, where everyone else was sticking their catalog online thinking that was going to change behavior. So it was people he enabled webmasters and people doing, e-commerce work, but he thought about it as a business process, a way of working, an experience that he transformed. That's what we have to do here, is really think about everything that we do, what could be done better in a data-driven world where insights are predictive all the time. You should ask yourself, when you're in a meeting and someone says, our revenue is off, the first question is why? But the second question is, what's going to happen tomorrow? And then the third question is, what should I do about it? People don't get to those questions because they're still stuck looking at reports that are backwards, instead of reimagining that everyone who comes into that meeting should tell you what they think is going to happen tomorrow and 2 months from now and whatever in the future with a predictive model. A data point without a prediction is just history. So if you can't see ahead, you can't make a decision. It's not unlike driving. If you drive without headlights, you are just hoping you can see at the last second what to do. With headlights, you can see where you're going and plan to go around the pothole or around the hazard and get safely where you want to go.
That's awesome. A data point without a prediction is just history. Love that. So talk about data itself, right? So the role of data. Most organizations have even the data asset. Data is an asset, and I think most people realize that. Most organizations realize that. But it's distributed. It's all over the different departments. There is no common, pool to actually go put the data in. The role of data in ensuring a successful AI implementations and predictive analytics implementations. Where are we? What is happening there? And is it a necessary step before you embark on an AI-driven digital transformation that you have to get your data in order?
There is no AI without data. And most AI projects are 90% data work. But you don't have to have perfect data to do AI, and you don't have to have your entire business sorted out before you can do it. There's a misconception that more data makes you, more digital, more able to do AI, but it's having the right data, knowing which data that is, and getting it accessible to the data scientists. So what I see is usually a very coordinated dance between data science and data engineering. And if you only focus on one, you don't have the right data to do the job. And the data engineers only exist to satisfy the people who consume and use data to produce an output. So when those work well together, you've got people focusing on understanding which data matters, getting it accessible, getting it in the right form so you could do something with it. And when those teams work well together, it's almost like a full stack data team, all the way, from data engineering, data ops, data science, AI, all of these people have to work well together to produce an output. And you have to have the business leaders obviously steering it and guiding it, so it delivers an output that matters. But I think this idea that more data is better is a misconception. Like if you look at IoT data, most IoT data is completely boring. It's like if you look at the temperature data off your thermostat, completely boring until your house is on fire and it spikes. Suddenly there's an event that's extremely interesting. So in this, you have to find the interesting moments in data and bring those forward to the data scientists. And the other stuff you kind of have to average out. And when you have bad data, you have to consider, is it systemically and predictably bad, or is it unpredictably bad? If it's always going to be off by 50%, you have something you can work with. If it's random, you have nothing to work with. And so people have to do the analytics behind it to see if your data is of those nature and whether you can produce a useful output.
No, Brett, to your point on more data is not necessarily great, right? I mean, just more data, more problems too. But there are classes of problems that you don't need a lot of data. You just need the right data for the right problem, right?
Right.
Can you give me some examples of some particular kinds of problems or business processes that can actually work with, like you can still use AI and ML-driven automation, but it works with lesser amount of data?
Yeah, of course. You could do revenue prediction and sales forecasting off of CRM data. You don't need a giant pile of data. You need some basic amount that might be historical, might capture seasonal changes, might capture the things that have the highest causal effect on your customers and whether they're going to sign something or buy something. But it's not a massive amount of data. You have narrow use cases like a drone inspection of power lines. It's a great use case. Power companies love it. They can look at whether trees are growing over power lines, whether there's defects on power lines. But the number of images you need to train those systems is very, very small. We've seen systems, for example, being trained on natural language processing. If you want to create a generic text-generating machine like OpenAI, massive data. But if you want to understand what patients are saying to a doctor, it's a narrow set of topics, terms, and context, and you can train it very efficiently. So it really, most of business use cases are reasonably well-defined domain of repeatable words or repeatable images or repeatable things, and you can train them on smaller sets.
Got it. No, that's interesting. I think the important aspect, most business problems also deal with data or problems that you're just transferring the knowledge from the human being to
Hmm.
an algorithm or a system, right? So it
Right.
works very well because you have a tight feedback loop. You know if something's wrong. Well, this shouldn't look like this. You're looking for a cat or a dog. It can be a giraffe, right? And
Right.
that feedback, if you can capture, have a way to do it, then you can deal with lower, smaller data sets that are more accurate, right? More
Yep.
useful.
Agree.
So one of the things that has caught a lot of, I would say, it's becoming more popular. A term right now is ML ops, right? Machine learning operations. Data ops was always there, but kind of rumbling in the background. So now ML ops is front page. Everybody's actually looking at. I think ML ops will solve my problem of scaling AI, right?
Yeah.
You did call out the one part, which is the aspect of the business leader starting from the problem, making sure that you're identifying the right questions to ask, right, as
Hmm.
being a critical element. But will ML ops really solve the problem of going from one project at a time to scaling ML in enterprises?
Sadly, no, but I'm really glad people are talking about it because it's really important. It's just necessary, not sufficient to solve the whole thing. In the same way that DevOps helped us move from a waterfall software development process to something agile and continuous, MLOps allows you to have continuous growth and improvements of your models. You can account for drift of models as data changes. You can assess whether models continue to deliver value. You can version the models. You can change, you can create related models to each other. So you can really manage a scaled, call it an infrastructure of models and algorithms using MLOps. But it obviously doesn't solve the business outcome problem. It also doesn't account for the fact that what you really want is incorporate the output of AI into software and applications and systems that interface with people. So in the case of insurance underwriting, we came up with a really cool system that would look at all the data that comes up about you when you call your underwriter. And it recommends the best price to give, optimizing on risk and revenue and customer sat and the likelihood you'll say yes, and presents it to the underwriter. Now, that's based on a model. That model was trained on Tuesday. You run it for a few weeks. You maybe get great results, but the world changes all the time. You need to version this model. You need to update it. You need to retrain it. You need to tune it. And so you need an MLOps backend to make sure that what's being presented to decision makers continues to be great. It might have delivered improved customer sat or improved revenue this week. 3 weeks from now, the world is different. I think the pandemic really highlighted the need for MLOps in particular because almost everybody's forecast models broke because human behavior changed so dramatically that, that's why we ran out of flour and yeast and toilet paper and everything else during the pandemic. And there continues now to be spikes in demand and supply and inventory and pricing. This is happening all the time. And it's because the forecast models they drift. They're no longer relevant if enough conditions change that it breaks the assumptions of the model. So MLOps is really, really necessary. And for me, the fact that people are talking about it is also a sign that people are beginning to rely on AI more for business processes.
Got it. Talking about toilet paper, we're running out of toilet paper. I think you and I talked about in one of the events we were together. Like, look, that aspect could have been predicted if we
Mm-hmm.
had in that short time frame from the time the problem started, the pandemic started, to really looking at all the leading indicators up to leading to the toilet paper rolls being missing, right?
Yeah, yeah. It sounds unpredictable, right? And it happened reasonably quickly. But they share a lot of information. So the information being shared on social media and everywhere else, it was all over the place. Everyone's talking about, oh, I'm so happy. I made a run to the store. I was able to get paper. I was able to get flour, whatever. I'm going to make more sourdough bread so that all the supplies ran out. People talk about stuff, and if you don't look for the signals, you miss them. There are other signals. I worked with a company that was using public webcams aimed at streets. And from that, they could derive the store traffic at various stores. They could see adults and children from the images going to store, estimate the number of adults, which they could then derive the revenue per store. And they overlaid it with geospatial data to see which stores it was, so they knew the different types of stores. You could get a really strong idea of the types of things people are buying, how often they're buying, the frequency and changes from public webcams if you're watching. So there's a lot of sources, social media, public data, that can be integrated with your enterprise data to better predict, and you'd be used as a signal for what might be changing.
I have a friend of mine who's got a company who's looking at public data sets like tender data, infrastructure projects, and that kind of stuff around the world. And we were talking yesterday, and he was telling me how there's no single source to aggregate all of that, because those are really amazing sets of data sets that you can use to predict the risk in a particular infrastructure project in Africa versus in the Middle East, or and then you overlay that with social data and other, again, publicly available data sets. Now you have a very powerful prediction engine that can give you a reasonable confidence about an event or something that is about to occur. So you're exactly right. You got to know what you're looking for too, right?
Yeah, and you got to have a hypothesis. I forgot the example of Bill Gates. You know what? I can't quote the example exactly, but it was all about looking for those leading signs that were way ahead of something actually running out. I think you have to have a hypothesis of what to look for in public data. You also have to have an environment, a platform, and a mindset that wants you to pull in that data. There's a lot of data available, geospatial data, people traffic pattern data from mobile providers, social data, other stuff. When you put it together, even satellite image data, people are estimating the revenue at Tesla based on the traffic coming in and out of factories in China using satellite data.
Yep.
I mean, this is all doable. It's just difficult. But as more people eat, this is not unlike mining for anything else that's valuable. The really good stuff is harder to get. So people who are better at it are going to get competitive advantage.
Awesome. What are your thoughts on the other topic is around trust and responsible AI, right? What are your thoughts on how you're approaching trust, and how are organizations looking at that problem today when they're deploying AI at scale?
Yeah, I think that trusting a system is not unlike trusting people. We trust but verify. And I think you also have to ask yourself, what is it you're asking the system to do? And then in the case of AI-based systems, your opportunity to introduce, you're talking about something that makes decisions at scale. It's being driven off of data. Small problems in data can become big problems in production. So because you're amplifying the effect of the data. So it's really important to have, we call it a responsible AI role as you're working on projects, to take a look at the things that are going to cause failure. Things like looking at bias within data, old data sets, looking at algorithms, whether the people who design the algorithms have a diverse perspective so they can catch things. Famous examples were the recruiting AI being used, I think, at Amazon, which became incredibly biased because it was based on the performance of past candidates, which had less diversity than future candidates. So you have to ask yourself if those things are happening, and if people who are watching for them, technically they're all correctable. If your data set happens to skew towards an older demographic and a different diversity, then you're going to have a different output, but you can correct for those biases in the data if you're aware of them, and then make sure you're getting the outcome you want. You also have to have people watching for the outcomes all the time to make sure they deliver results. If you're trusting people to do your hiring or your selling or customer service, you still watch, listen, verify, you get recorded. Your call will be recorded for quality assurance. We have to do quality assurance on the decisions made by AI as well, to make sure it's always representing your brand, treating customers well, making decisions that are fair and unbiased, doing the right thing. And that requires a different mindset. So again, don't delegate this to data scientists. There's nothing wrong with data scientists, but you need people who focus on responsible AI to make sure it's being done in a way that enhances customer experience and your brand and doesn't hurt it.
What is really fascinating about this conversation and the points you're making is you take a very practical approach to this, and the practical approach of how do I generate value for the business, and what are the things I can manage, and how do I actually identify the risk and manage it, and so forth. Which is, I think, a very, very it's a really good blueprint to actually work with any frontier technology, leave alone AI. Right? Really look at it as, what business problem am I solving? Do I have the right people to go do it? Am I doing it the right way? Do I have the quality control? How do I really industrialize this experience of getting to value? Give me an example, or a couple more examples of some of the exciting projects you're currently working on, if you can talk about it, of course.
Yeah, so a big part of our time is being spent in helping people to build out a true data fabric for their enterprise. I think a lot of people focused on the data that came from their systems, ERP data, HCM data, CRM data, and they focus on that data as if it's the only stuff that mattered. And people are beginning to realize what they really need to do is to make data accessible to the decision makers in the enterprise and be able to bring in third-party and external data. So a lot of focus is going on right now in the adoption of cloud, but not just migrating the data warehouse from A to B on cloud, but to reimagine data in an environment where it's more accessible, where unstructured data, text, video, image, and stuff is brought in, analyzed, and put into forms that could be acted on, where you virtualize the ERP data or bring it into a data fabric, but make it accessible for data scientists, and then unlocking that data through data science to bring better decisions. And that's really what it's about in the end. It's about decisions, whether it's an underwriter, whether it's an X-ray technician, whether it's a sales associate or someone on the phone. These are all decisions. And the more you automate, you're still making decisions. You're just doing it in an automated way. Someone has to inspect those decisions. We're doing a really cool project, for example, to help transform customer service at a large fast food restaurant. And we are able to take a set of orders that previously went to people, and some of it still goes to people, but some of it can go to an AI that can handle the common, easy requests. And when it does that, you can provide a no-wait customer experience. So instead of waiting for a person to be ready and explaining stuff, you get immediate service. And that is a possibility of transforming the entire experience. It has to be good. It has to be great, actually. People don't expect a lot out of a person. They expect an AI they talk to be amazing. So it has to be great, but when it is, it can be transformative because it eliminates the wait and allows you to speak naturally and get things done. So a lot of really fun, exciting projects are happening around the world, whether it's vision, natural language, just predictive models that I think are changing the way things happen in the world.
That is awesome, Brett. Bring it home for me. Give me your top 3 to 5 pieces of advice for any organization, any business leader embarking on or scaling their AI journeys.
First, no one is that far ahead. This is still very early days in a technology that is evolving rapidly. So for companies that are moving now, making investments, not just in the data and the technology, but in the leadership who understands AI and data, they're going to have a very fast start in the next 5 years. For companies who hesitate and wait, it will be harder to catch up. But the good news is most people are still very early in the journey, so it's not too late for you. I think that goes to the second point, which is education. Making sure you have business leaders who do understand what data-driven really means. It doesn't mean look at another report. It means knowing the questions to ask, the data you need, and getting the right people to work on the types of analytics that are predictive in nature, that are prescriptive, that are really helpful, not just flashing red or yellow on the old report. So you'll know it when you see it because people who are data-driven are focused very much on predictive models and understanding what's coming rather than looking backwards at what already happened. They understand why and what to do about it. So this is a new way of thinking for business leaders. So that would be my step number 2. And I think this third part is to really embrace the talent. There's a lot of talent within your enterprise who is already learning or dying to learn these new technical skills. There's a lot of talent in the industry right now. Data science is the hottest skill in the industry right now. And everybody is learning it, doing it, trying it, experimenting. It's a fun time. And it's not unlike how much fun it was in the early days of the web, where webmasters really drew a lot of people in. People are learning late in life. I have a friend whose wife is in her 50s. She just got data science certified, just started a whole second career now around this. So it is learnable for people who have the passion and energy and the data mindset. It's learnable, and it's a good time to learn.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I got a bunch of standard questions I always ask my guests. Sure. What's one problem that is a call from you to innovators out there that's still not solved in AI that should be solved?
Causality. There is so much of the world who is still focused on correlation and making big decisions on correlations that really don't make any sense. And not enough people who are asking good questions about causality. When we did the COVID work, one of the things we were able to test is we could vary assumptions, like, for example, on work closure. And if you changed it up or down a little bit, you could see how much it affected the predictive models. Other things you could change had no effect. What we were looking for was causality. Which things actually caused the cases to grow, not what happens to correlate to it. So I think it's a big issue because I don't think business leaders understand the nature of it. They jump to correlation all the time. And I don't think the data science community has been very good at expressing and proving to people why some things matter more than others. But you'll spend a lot of energy burning looking for data that doesn't matter, collecting too much of it, burning energy on projects that don't have real outcome because you're just stuck on a correlation that's not causal.
Interesting. AGI, artificial general intelligence, robots taking over. Do you fear it? Do you worry about it? Do you think we'll see it in our lifetime?
I wouldn't even be in this field if I didn't dream of it being possible. But I fully understand the fear people have. It is so far from where we are now. 100 years ago, there were no airplanes. Now we fly wherever we want to go. The world changed a lot in 100 years. It will change again in 100 years around the power and impact of AI. But I think we're thinking of it wrong because we're thinking of AGI as being a copy of a person. And I think it's always going to be about what AI is good at, what the attributes are of it that it's very strong at, and its ability to take on broader, more generalized tasks, which will occur. But the idea of what people interpret AGI as its artificial life is so far from what you have to worry about. Let's focus more on making it really powerful and useful. Honestly, if the AI can't answer the phone for you and you still have to press 4 to talk to billing, I don't think you have to worry about AGI taking over the world yet. But there will be a day where AI is able to simulate and interact with us in ways that feel very natural, and we should be trying to work on that because it can help us in our day-to-day jobs and lives.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, and I believe this. What we're in the middle of is an intelligence revolution, right? The world has become so much more complicated, so much more interesting, so many different things happening. It's just impossible for just our little brain to actually comprehend everything. So you need to now infuse intelligence in these non-living systems in the service of the human to make our human experience better. So that's where the real opportunity comes with AI too. Where can I have one personal question, by the way, Bret. What is one personal practice that you employ to be on the top of your game?
I automate news. So I've set up a series of alerts and triggers and things that look on words and things that I care about so that news is summarized and paraphrased to me. I've used various ways of automating, including just Google Alerts, but also a variety of tools. I find that by looking at the patterns in the news, even if you can't read everything, look at the patterns in the news to see what's going on and what people are talking about. ML Ops was something that was only 3 geeks talked about a little while ago, and now it's buzzworthy everywhere. Seeing those things coming early allows you to have a point of view, be able to talk to your customers, your business partners, your colleagues about these things. And I find it's a fast-moving pace. And if you blink, you miss really important news. But it doesn't always pop up in your news feed. You're going to have to kind of draw it out. So that's one thing I do, and it's really helped me stay on top of this.
Automate. I love that. Bret, this has been fascinating, full of very practical pieces of wisdom and advice for everybody. How can the viewers get in touch with you? Where can they find you online?
So certainly, this sounds trite, Twitter, Instagram, but mostly LinkedIn. I try to stay very engaged on LinkedIn and try to make sure I share things and points of view that are interesting and engage with people who all over the industry have had questions or ideas or just want to make connections. So I just think it's important for all of us to stay out there because it's a small community of people who are driving a lot of innovation and a much broader community who's interested in it. And I think it's up to all of us to share, educate, and just engage.
That's well said. That's the whole purpose of this series as well. Thank you so much for taking the time today. And it was a blast.
Thank you, Ganesh.